The grocery store was busy that Tuesday afternoon, filled with the usual mix of tired parents, elderly shoppers, and hurried professionals grabbing lunch. Sarah Martinez pushed her cart through the cereal aisle, her 6-year-old daughter Emma skipping beside her, chattering excitedly about the upcoming school science fair. Emma had always been an energetic child, full of curiosity and boundless enthusiasm. Today was no different as she pointed at colorful boxes and asked endless questions about everything she saw. Sarah smiled patiently, answering each question while mentally checking off items from her shopping list. "Mommy, can we get the one with the toy inside?" Emma asked, reaching toward a bright blue box on the top shelf. "Let me see what is first, sweetheart," Sarah replied, stretching to grab the box. As she did, Emma's excitement got the better of her, and she began jumping up and down trying to reach it herself. "I can get it! I can get it!" Emma squealed, her voice echoing through the aisle. That's when Derek Thompson appeared at the end of the aisle. He was a large man in his 40s, wearing an expensive suit and an expression of barely contained irritation. He had been having a terrible day at work, dealing with difficult clients and missed deadlines. The last thing he wanted to hear was a child making noise. Derek marched down the aisle, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. He had 3 children of his own, but they had been taught to behave properly in public. This scene in front of him was exactly what he believed was wrong with modern parenting. Parents who let their children run wild without any discipline. "Excuse me," Derek said loudly, stopping directly in front of Sarah's cart. His voice carried an unmistakable tone of authority and annoyance. Sarah looked up, surprised by the interruption. She had been focused on calming Emma, who was still bouncing excitedly beside the cart. "Yes?" she asked politely, though she could sense the man's hostile energy. "Your child is being extremely disruptive," Derek announced, his voice loud enough for other shoppers to hear. Several people in nearby aisles turned to look at the confrontation unfolding. Some of us are trying to shop in peace. Emma, sensing the tension, moved closer to her mother's side. Her excitement faded, replaced by confusion and a hint of fear. She had been having fun just moments before, and now this angry man was yelling about her. Sarah felt her protective instincts kick in immediately. She had dealt with her share of difficult people throughout her life, but seeing someone intimidate her child triggered something deeper. Still, she tried to keep her voice calm and reasonable. "She's just excited about cereal," Sarah said evenly. "We'll keep it down." But Derek wasn't satisfied with that response. In his mind, this was about principle. Children needed to learn respect and discipline, and parents needed to enforce it. He had seen too many kids running around stores, restaurants, and public places while their parents did nothing. "That's not good enough," he said, stepping closer to Sarah's cart. "You need to control your child properly. This is a public place, not a playground." Emma shrank back further, her small hand reaching for her mother's arm. She didn't understand why the man was so angry, but his loud voice and aggressive posture frightened her. Other shoppers had stopped their shopping entirely now, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Sarah felt her jaw clench slightly, but she maintained her composure. She had learned long ago how to stay calm under pressure, how to assess threats, and respond appropriately. Right now, she was trying to de-escalate a situation that didn't need to exist in the first place. "Sir, I understand you're frustrated, but there's no need to raise your voice," Sarah said firmly. "My daughter wasn't doing anything wrong." Derek's face reddened at what he perceived as defiance. In his experience, when he spoke with authority, people listened. His own family, his employees, even his neighbors had learned to respect his position and his opinions. This woman's calm response only made him angrier. "Don't tell me what I need to do," Derek snapped. "You're the one who can't control her kid. Maybe if you spent less time making excuses and more time teaching discipline, we wouldn't have this problem." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. Years of training had taught her to recognize when a situation was escalating beyond words, when someone's aggression might turn physical. Emma tugged on her mother's shirt, her voice small and worried. "Mommy, why is he being mean?" The question seemed to push Derek over the edge. Here was this child, still talking, still making noise, and the mother was doing nothing to silence her. In his frustration and anger, he made a decision that would change everything. "Maybe you need to learn some respect too," Derek said. And without warning, he reached out and shoved Emma hard on the shoulder. The 6-year-old stumbled backward, her small body unable to absorb the force of the push. She hit the edge of the shopping cart and fell to the ground, landing hard on the linoleum floor. Her cry of pain and surprise echoed through the suddenly silent store. For a moment, time seemed frozen. Other shoppers gasped and stepped back, shocked by what they had just witnessed. A grown man had just pushed a small child to the ground in the middle of a grocery store. Sarah's world narrowed to a single point of focus. Every instinct, every hour of training, every mission she had ever completed suddenly crystallized into this moment. Someone had just attacked her child. But instead of exploding into action, Sarah did something that surprised everyone, including Derek. She knelt down calmly, helped Emma to her feet, and checked her for injuries. Her daughter was crying more from shock than pain, but Sarah's trained eyes quickly assessed that nothing was seriously wrong. "Are you okay, baby?" Sarah asked softly, her voice gentle and soothing despite the storm building inside her. Emma nodded, wiping her eyes. "He pushed me, Mommy." "Why did he push me?" "I don't know, sweetheart, but it's going to be okay," Sarah said, standing back up and facing Derek with a completely different energy than before. Derek, meanwhile, was already beginning to realize he had crossed a line. The shocked faces of other shoppers, the sound of Emma's crying, and the sudden attention from store employees rushing toward them made him understand that his action had been completely inappropriate. But it was too late for regret. Sarah Martinez was no longer just a mother shopping with her daughter. Years of military training, combat experience, and protective instincts had been activated by his decision to put his hands on her child. "You just made a very serious mistake," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying a tone that made Derek take an involuntary step backward. The grocery store had become very quiet, except for Emma's sniffles and the sound of approaching footsteps from store security. Derek looked around and realized that dozens of people had witnessed him push a small child. His face went pale as the full implications of his actions began to sink in. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, but not to call for help. Instead, she opened the camera app and took a clear photo of Derek's face. Then, she stepped closer to him, close enough that only he could hear her next words. "You have about 30 seconds to decide how this is going to go," she said calmly. "You can apologize to my daughter and walk away, or you can find out exactly who you just messed with." Derek looked into Sarah's eyes and saw something that made his blood run cold. This wasn't an angry mother making empty threats. This was someone who had seen real conflict, someone who knew exactly what they were capable of, and someone who was giving him one chance to make this right. The next few moments would determine whether this remained a simple case of poor judgment or became something much more serious. Derek had to choose, and he was beginning to realize that he had severely underestimated the woman standing in front of him. Derek Thompson stood frozen in place, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The confidence and authority he had displayed just moments earlier had completely evaporated under Sarah's steady gaze. Something about the way she looked at him, the controlled way she spoke, and the complete absence of fear in her demeanor told him he was in serious trouble. I didn't mean," Derek stammered, but the words wouldn't come. He looked around desperately, hoping for some escape from the situation he had created. More shoppers had gathered now, some recording the confrontation on their phones, others whispering among themselves about what they had just witnessed. Store manager Janet Rodriguez pushed through the small crowd that had formed, followed closely by 2 security guards. She had been working retail for over 15 years and had seen plenty of difficult customers, but this was something else entirely. A man in an expensive suit had just assaulted a child in her store. What's going on here? Janet demanded, looking between Derek and Sarah. Her trained eye immediately noted Emma's tear-stained face and defensive posture behind her mother. This man pushed my 6-year-old daughter to the ground, Sarah said calmly, never taking her eyes off Derek. Multiple witnesses saw it happen. That's not exactly what. Derek tried to protest, but several nearby shoppers immediately spoke up. He definitely pushed her, called out an elderly woman with a shopping basket. I saw the whole thing. Poor little girl didn't do anything wrong. Completely unprovoked, added a man in a construction vest. The kid was just being a normal kid, and this guy lost his mind. Derek felt the walls closing in around him. He looked at Janet, hoping for some understanding, but her expression was cold and professional. This was the kind of incident that could make headlines, and she needed to handle it carefully. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me to the office while we sort this out, Janet said firmly. Security will escort you. Wait, this is all a misunderstanding, Derek protested, finally finding his voice. The child was being disruptive, and I barely touched her. She's fine, look at her. Sarah's expression didn't change, but her voice dropped even lower. You put your hands on my child. In what world did you think that was acceptable? For the first time since the confrontation began, Derek really looked at Sarah Martinez. He had been so focused on his own anger and frustration that he hadn't paid attention to the woman he was dealing with. Now, forced to actually see her, he noticed details that should have worn him off. Sarah stood with perfect posture, her feet positioned in a stance that suggested she was ready to move in any direction at a moment's notice. Her clothes were casual, but practical, and there was no jewelry that could be grabbed or used against her. Most importantly, her eyes held a steady, calculating look that reminded him uncomfortably of his brother-in-law, who had served in the military. Look, I'm sorry, okay? Derek said, his voice taking on a pleading tone. I had a bad day at work, and I overreacted. But this doesn't need to become a big deal, right? Kids are resilient. Emma peeked out from behind her mother, her small voice cutting through Derek's excuses. You hurt me, she said simply. Why did you hurt me? The innocent question hit Derek like a physical blow. Looking down at the little girl he had pushed, seeing her confusion and hurt, he finally began to understand the magnitude of what he had done. This wasn't about noise or discipline or having a bad day. He had physically attacked a child. Sarah knelt down and pulled Emma into a gentle hug. You didn't do anything wrong, baby, she said softly. Sometimes adults make bad choices, but that's not your fault. Standing back up, Sarah turned to Janet. I want to press charges for assault, and I want a copy of your security footage. Absolutely, Janet replied immediately. We have cameras covering this entire area. I'll have everything ready for the police. Police. Derek's voice cracked slightly. Come on, that's not necessary. I said I was sorry. One of the security guards, a former police officer named Marcus, stepped forward. Sir, you need to understand that what you did constitutes assault on a minor. This isn't something that gets resolved with an apology. Derek's mind raced as he tried to think of a way out of this situation. He was a successful businessman with a reputation to protect. He served on the board of his country club and coached Little League Baseball. A criminal charge would destroy everything he had worked for. Please, Derek said, turning back to Sarah with desperation in his voice. I have kids of my own. I would never normally do something like this. Can't we just work this out between us? Sarah studied him for a long moment, and Derek felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this reasonable-seeming woman would understand that people make mistakes. You have children? Sarah asked quietly. Yes, 3 of them, Derek said quickly, sensing an opportunity. A boy and 2 girls. I understand how protective you feel. That's why I got so upset about the noise. I just want kids to learn proper behavior. By pushing them to the ground, Derek winced. That was wrong. I know it was wrong, but surely we can handle this without involving the police? I'll pay for any medical bills, therapy, whatever she needs. Sarah looked down at Emma, who was clinging to her leg and watching Derek with wary eyes. Then she looked back at Derek, and something in her expression shifted slightly. You know what? You're right, Sarah said, and Derek felt relief wash over him. This can be handled without police. Derek's shoulders sagged with gratitude. Thank you. I really appreciate your understanding. I can give you my business card, and we can instead, Sarah continued, her voice cutting through his relief like a knife. I'm going to handle this the way we would have in the Navy. Derek blinked, confused. The Navy? That's right, Sarah said, reaching into her wallet and pulling out a military ID card. Chief Petty Officer Sarah Martinez, United States Navy SEALs. 8 years of active duty, 3 combat deployments. The color drained completely from Derek's face as he stared at the ID card. Navy SEALs were elite special forces, some of the most highly trained warriors in the world. And he had just assaulted the child of one of them. Oh, God, Derek whispered, stumbling backward. Marcus, the security guard, let out a low whistle. Well, this just got very interesting, he murmured to his partner. Janet's eyes widened as she looked at Sarah with new respect. She had suspected there was something different about this woman, something that explained her unusual calm in the face of such a shocking situation. So here's what's going to happen, Sarah continued, her voice taking on the unmistakable tone of military authority. You're going to stand right there while the police arrive. You're going to cooperate fully with their investigation. And you're going to accept whatever consequences come from your decision to put your hands on my child. Derek's legs felt weak. Stories of what happened to people who crossed Navy SEALs flashed through his mind. These weren't just soldiers. They were elite operatives trained in warfare, survival, and a dozen different ways to neutralize threats. I didn't know, Derek stammered. If I had known who you were. You would have what? Sarah asked sharply. Not assaulted a child. The fact that you think my military service is relevant here tells me everything I need to know about you. Emma tugged on her mother's shirt again. Mommy, what's a Navy SEAL? Sarah's expression softened as she looked down at her daughter. Navy SEALs are people who protect others, sweetheart. They make sure bad guys can't hurt good people. The simple explanation wasn't lost on Derek. In Sarah's world, he had just identified himself as one of the bad guys. And Navy SEALs were very good at dealing with bad guys. The police are on their way, Janet announced, having just finished a phone call. They should be here in about 5 minutes. Derek looked around desperately, but there was no escape. Security guards blocked the main exits. Dozens of witnesses surrounded him, and Sarah Martinez stood between him and any hope of walking away from the situation. For the first time in his adult life, Derek Thompson was completely powerless, at the mercy of consequences he couldn't control or manipulate. And the person holding his fate was someone he had made the catastrophic mistake of underestimating. The next few minutes would determine not just whether Derek faced criminal charges, but whether his entire carefully constructed life would come crashing down around him. All because he couldn't control his temper when faced with a 6-year-old girl who was excited about cereal. The police arrived exactly when Janet had predicted, their patrol car pulling up outside the grocery store with no sirens but plenty of authority. Through the large windows, Derek could see Officer Patricia Williams and her partner Officer James Chun getting out of their vehicle, adjusting their equipment belts as they approached the entrance. Derek's heart pounded as he watched them enter the store. He had never been arrested before, had never even received a serious traffic ticket. His interactions with law enforcement had been limited to charity events and the occasional speeding warning that his lawyer's business card had helped resolve. Over here, officers, Janet called out, waving them toward the cereal aisle where the crowd still lingered. Officer Williams took immediate control of the scene with the practiced efficiency of someone who had handled countless domestic disputes and public disturbances. She was a 12-year veteran of the force, known for her ability to quickly assess situations and separate facts from emotions. I'm Officer Williams. This is Officer Chun, she announced to the group. We understand there was an altercation involving a minor. I need everyone except the involved parties to step back and give us some room to work. Most of the crowd dispersed reluctantly, though several witnesses made sure to give their contact information to Officer Chun before leaving. They wanted to ensure their testimony would be available if needed. Derek found himself standing in front of Officer Williams, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like a costume that no longer fit properly. Everything about his appearance suggested success and respectability, but his current situation told a very different story. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification," Officer Williams said to Derek, her tone professional but firm. Derek fumbled for his wallet, his hand shaking slightly as he extracted his driver's license. Officer Williams examined it carefully, noting his address in an expensive suburb and his clean appearance. "Derek Thompson," she read aloud. "What's your version of what happened here today, Mr. Thompson?" Derek cleared his throat, trying to summon the confidence that had served him so well in boardrooms and business negotiations. "Officer, this has all been blown way out of proportion. There was a misunderstanding about noise levels and things got a little heated. I may have accidentally made contact with a child, but it certainly wasn't intentional assault." Officer Williams nodded neutrally, making notes in her report book. Then she turned to Sarah, who was still holding Emma's hand protectively. "And you are?" "Sarah Martinez," Sarah replied, producing both her driver's license and her military ID. "This man deliberately pushed my 6-year-old daughter to the ground after she was doing nothing more than being excited about breakfast cereal." Officer Williams examined Sarah's credentials, her eyebrows rising slightly when she saw the military identification. "Navy SEAL?" she asked with obvious respect. "Yes, ma'am. 8 years active duty, recently transitioned to civilian life." Officer Chun, who had been questioning witnesses, returned to his partner's side. "Patricia, I've got 4 independent witnesses who all tell the same story." The man approached the woman and child became verbally aggressive about the child making noise, then deliberately pushed the little girl hard enough to knock her down. Derek felt his stomach drop. "That's not. I mean, they might have misunderstood what they saw." "Mr. Thompson," Officer Williams said, her tone becoming more serious, "we also have security footage of the incident. The store manager is preparing a copy for us right now. Would you like to revise your statement?" The words hit Derek like a physical blow. Security cameras. In all his panic and desperation, he had forgotten about the cameras that covered every inch of modern retail stores. There would be clear, undeniable video evidence of exactly what he had done. Derek started, then stopped. His lawyer had always told him never to admit guilt to police officers, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. "Maybe I should call my attorney." "That's your right," Officer Williams agreed. "But I want to be clear about what we're dealing with here. Based on witness statements and pending review of the security footage, you're looking at charges of assault in the 3rd degree involving a minor. That's a serious criminal offense." Emma had been quietly listening to the adult conversation, not understanding all the words, but recognizing that the man who hurt her was in trouble. She tugged on her mother's shirt again. "Mommy, is the police lady going to arrest the mean man?" Sarah knelt down to Emma's level. "The police officers are going to make sure he faces consequences for hurting you, baby. That's their job." Derek couldn't help but overhear the conversation, and the innocence in Emma's voice hit him harder than any legal threat could. She wasn't being vindictive or angry. She was simply a confused child trying to understand why an adult had hurt her for no reason. "Can I speak with Ms. Martinez privately for a moment?" Derek asked desperately, looking between the officers. "Any conversation you have will be in our presence," Officer Williams stated firmly. "NDMS. Martinez is under no obligation to speak with you at all." Sarah stood back up, considering Derek's request. Part of her military training involved psychological operations and understanding human behavior under stress. She could see that Derek was beginning to truly comprehend the gravity of his situation. "I'll listen to what you have to say," Sarah said finally. "But make it quick." Derek took a deep breath, searching for words that might somehow undo the last 15 minutes of his life. "Ms. Martinez, I know I made a terrible mistake. I have 3 children of my own, and if someone had done to them what I did to Emma, I would want to tear them apart." Sarah's expression didn't change, but she was listening. "I've been under incredible stress at work," Derek continued. "My company is going through layoffs, I haven't been sleeping well, and my wife has been on me about my temper. None of that excuses what I did, but I'm trying to explain that this isn't who I normally am. Who you normally are doesn't matter, Sarah replied coldly. What matters is what you chose to do to my child. Derek nodded miserably. You're absolutely right. But please, I'm begging you to consider the impact this will have on my family. My wife, my kids, they don't deserve to suffer because I lost control for 30 seconds. Officer Williams was watching this exchange carefully. She had seen many cases where victims were pressured to drop charges to protect their attacker's family or reputation. It was one of the aspects of her job that frustrated her most. Mr. Thompson, Officer Williams interjected, I want to be very clear about something. The decision to file charges isn't entirely up to Ms. Martinez. When there's clear evidence of assault on a minor, the state has an interest in prosecution regardless of the victim's wishes. Derek's face went pale again. He had hoped that somehow convincing Sarah to forgive him might make this all go away. The realization that the legal system would move forward with or without her cooperation was devastating. Sarah looked down at Emma, who was watching the adults with wide, serious eyes. Then, she looked back at Derek, studying his face carefully. Years of military service had taught her to read people, to assess whether someone was genuinely remorseful or simply sorry they got caught. Tell me about your children, Sarah said suddenly. Derek blinked, surprised by the change in direction. My children? Yes. How old are they? What are their names? Jessica is 14, Michael is 11, and Amy is 7, Derek said, confused about where this was leading. And if someone pushed Amy to the ground in a store, what would you want to happen to that person? Derek's voice cracked as he answered. I would want them prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Even if they apologized, even if they claimed it was just a bad day. Derek closed his eyes, finally, understanding the point Sarah was making. No, an apology wouldn't be enough. Sarah nodded slowly. Then, you understand why your apology isn't enough for me. Officer Chin returned from the store office, carrying a USB drive. We've got the security footage, he announced to his partner. Crystal clear video of the entire incident. Derek's last hope evaporated. There would be no disputing what had happened, no way to claim it was a misunderstanding or accident. The cameras had captured everything, including his deliberate decision to put his hands on a child. Derek Thompson, Officer Williams said formally, you're under arrest for assault in the 3rd degree. You have the right to remain silent. As the Miranda rights were read, Derek felt handcuffs being placed on his wrist for the first time in his life. The cold metal was a shocking reminder that his world had fundamentally changed in the span of less than an hour. Sarah held Emma closer as they watched Derek being led away. Her daughter was still confused about many aspects of what had happened, but she understood that the man who hurt her was facing consequences for his actions. Mommy, are we safe now? Emma asked quietly. We were always safe, baby, Sarah replied, meaning every word. But now he won't be able to hurt anyone else either. 3 days later, Derek Thompson sat in the visiting room of the county detention center, still wearing the orange jumpsuit that had become his uniform since his arrest. His bail hearing wasn't scheduled until Monday, and his lawyer had warned him that given the nature of the charges and the public attention the case was receiving, bail might be set quite high. Across from him sat his wife, Rebecca, her eyes red from crying and her usually perfect appearance disheveled from stress. Between them sat their lawyer, Michael Hartwell, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in cases involving white-collar professionals who found themselves on the wrong side of the law. The video is damning, Derek, Hartwell said bluntly, his briefcase open on the metal table between them. I've seen it, the prosecutor has seen it, and by now half the internet has seen it too. Derek winced. The security footage from the grocery store had somehow leaked online, and the video of him pushing 6-year-old Emma to the ground had gone viral. Local news stations had picked up the story, social media was buzzing with outrage, and his employer had already placed him on indefinite unpaid leave pending the outcome of his case. How bad is it? Rebecca asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer would be devastating. Hartwell pulled out a tablet and showed them several screenshots from news articles and social media posts. The headline on the evening news was Local Executive Assaults Navy SEAL's Daughter. The story is everything that makes for viral content. an innocent child, a military hero, and a wealthy businessman who lost control. Derek buried his face in his hands. I can't believe this is happening. It was 30 seconds of poor judgment, and now my entire life is ruined. Your poor judgment resulted in the assault of a 6-year-old child, Hartwell said sharply. I need you to understand the severity of what you're facing here. This isn't just about criminal charges anymore. The public attention means the prosecutor is under pressure to make an example of you. Rebecca reached across the table, but the guard immediately stepped forward to remind her that physical contact wasn't allowed. What are our options? She asked desperately. Limited, Hartwell admitted. The evidence is overwhelming. There are multiple witnesses, and the victim's mother is a decorated Navy veteran. No jury is going to have sympathy for Derek in this situation. Derek looked up at his lawyer with haunted eyes. What about a plea deal? The prosecutor might be willing to discuss it, but you need to understand what you'd be pleading guilty to. Assault in the 3rd degree carries a potential sentence of up to 1 year in jail and a fine of up to $10,000. Plus, you'd have a permanent criminal record. A year in jail? Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. That's the maximum sentence, Hartwell clarified. But given the circumstances, the public attention, and the fact that the victim was a child, I wouldn't expect the prosecutor to recommend the minimum either. Derek's mind raced as he tried to process the information. A year in jail would destroy his career permanently. His position as a senior partner at the consulting firm would obviously be terminated, his professional licenses would be affected, and the stigma of being a convicted child abuser would follow him for the rest of his life. What about the civil lawsuit? Derek asked, though he dreaded the answer. Hartwell nodded grimly. Ms. Martinez has retained an attorney. They're seeking damages for emotional distress, medical expenses, and punitive damages. Given your financial position and the nature of the assault, they could ask for a significant amount. How significant? Potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars. Maybe more if they can prove long-term psychological damage to the child. Rebecca started crying again, the sound echoing off the concrete walls of the visiting room. Their comfortable suburban life, their children's college funds, their retirement plans. Everything was being threatened by Derek's moment of uncontrolled anger. Meanwhile, across town, Sarah Martinez was dealing with her own set of challenges. Emma had been having nightmares since the incident, waking up crying about the mean man who had hurt her. Sarah had already scheduled several appointments with a child psychologist to help Emma process what had happened. Sarah's phone rang constantly now, reporters wanting interviews, victims' rights advocates offering support, and military friends checking on her welfare. The attention was overwhelming and unwanted. She had never sought fame for her military service, and she certainly didn't want it now. "Mommy, why do all those people want to talk to us?" Emma asked as they sat in their living room, watching yet another news van pull up outside their modest apartment complex. "Because what happened to you is wrong, and people are upset about it," Sarah explained patiently. "But we don't have to talk to them if we don't want to." Emma nodded solemnly, then returned her attention to the coloring book in her lap. She was drawing a picture of herself and her mother, both of them wearing big smiles. Despite everything that had happened, Emma's resilience continued to amaze Sarah. The phone rang again, and Sarah checked the caller ID. It was her victim's advocate, Jennifer Walsh, calling with an update about the case. Jennifer. Any news? The prosecutor wants to meet with you and Emma before Monday's bail hearing, Jennifer said. They want to get a sense of how Emma is doing and whether she'll be able to testify if the case goes to trial. Sarah looked at her daughter, still focused on her coloring. The idea of putting Emma through the stress of a trial was heartbreaking, but she also knew that letting Derek Thompson escape consequences would be worse. "What do you think our chances are if we go to trial?" Sarah asked. "With that video evidence and multiple witnesses, it's almost a certainty that he'll be convicted. The question is whether he'll take a plea deal to avoid the publicity of a trial. And if he doesn't, then you and Emma will need to testify about what happened and how it's affected your lives. I won't lie to you, Sarah, it won't be easy, especially for Emma. Sarah considered this information carefully. Her military training had prepared her for many difficult situations, but protecting her daughter's emotional well-being while seeking justice was perhaps the most challenging mission she had ever faced. "Let me think about it and get back to you," Sarah said finally. After hanging up, Sarah sat down next to Emma on the couch. "Sweetheart, do you remember what happened to the store with the man who pushed you?" Emma nodded without looking up from her coloring. "He was mean to me, but you made sure the police came to help." "That's right. Now, some people might want to ask you questions about what happened. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, okay?" Emma looked up at her mother with serious eyes. "Will the mean man try to hurt me again?" "No, baby. He can't hurt you anymore. Mommy will make sure of that." "Okay," Emma said, returning to her coloring with the simple trust that only children possess. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from her lawyer. "Derek Thompson's attorney wants to discuss a settlement. Are you interested in hearing what they have to offer?" Sarah stared at the message for a long moment. Part of her wanted to see Derek Thompson face the full consequences of his actions in a public trial. But another part of her wanted to protect Emma from any further trauma and move on with their lives. The decision she made would affect not just her own family, but potentially set a precedent for how society handled cases of adults assaulting children. The pressure of that responsibility weighed heavily on her shoulders as she tried to determine the best path forward. Outside, another news van pulled up, and Sarah could hear reporters discussing the case on the sidewalk. The story had taken on a life of its own, far beyond a simple assault that had started it all. Whatever happened next would be scrutinized by the public, debated on social media, and potentially remembered long after Emma had forgotten the details of that day in the grocery store. The choices made in the next few days would determine not just Derek Thompson's fate, but how Emma would remember this chapter of her childhood, and what lessons she would learn about justice, forgiveness, and standing up for what's right. 2 weeks after the incident at the grocery store, Sarah Martinez stood in the courthouse hallway, watching Derek Thompson's family huddle together near the defendant's table. His wife, Rebecca, looked exhausted. Their 3 children appeared confused and frightened, and Derek himself seemed to have aged years in just days. The media attention hadn't died down as Sarah had hoped it would. If anything, it had intensified. The story had become a national talking point about everything from parenting in public spaces to military veterans' rights to the justice system's treatment of wealthy defendants. Sarah's lawyer, David Chun, approached her with a manila folder in his hand. "The plea agreement is final," he said quietly. 6 months in county jail, 2 years probation, anger management classes, and $50,000 in restitution. Plus, he has to perform 200 hours of community service, specifically with children's organizations. Sarah nodded, though she felt conflicted about the agreement. Part of her had wanted to see Derek face the maximum penalty, but the prosecutor had explained that a plea deal would spare Emma from having to testify and guarantee a conviction without the uncertainty of trial. "How do you feel about it?" David asked. "I feel like it's not enough," Sarah said honestly. "But I also feel like putting Emma through a trial would be worse." Emma was at school that morning, blissfully unaware that her attacker was about to be sentenced. Sarah had decided not to bring her to court, wanting to shield her from as much of the legal process as possible. The nightmares had finally stopped, and Emma was beginning to act like her normal, cheerful self again. Inside the courtroom, Judge Patricia Morrison reviewed the plea agreement with practiced efficiency. She was known for her no-nonsense approach to criminal justice and her particular intolerance for crimes involving children. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Morrison said, looking directly at Derek, "you understand that by accepting this plea agreement, you are admitting guilt to assault in the 3rd degree?" Derek stood up slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Yes, Your Honor. And you understand that this will result in a permanent criminal record and all the consequences that entail?" "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Morrison studied Derek for a long moment before speaking again. "Mr. Thompson, I want you to understand something. The victim in this case was a 6-year-old child whose only crime was being excited about breakfast cereal. You, a grown man, made a conscious decision to physically assault her because you were inconvenienced by normal childhood behavior. Derek's face reddened, but he remained silent. Furthermore, the judge continued, the victim's mother is a decorated Navy SEAL who served our country with distinction. She showed remarkable restraint in dealing with you, far more restraint than you showed in dealing with a child. Sarah felt a mixture of vindication and discomfort at being singled out. Her military service was part of who she was, but she didn't want it to be the only reason Derek's actions were taken seriously. The plea agreement you've accepted is reasonable given the circumstances, Judge Morrison said. But I want to make something very clear. If you appear before me again on any charge involving violence or intimidation, I will remember this case, and I will impose the maximum sentence allowed by law. Understand, Your Honor, Derek said quietly. 6 months in county jail beginning today. 2 years probation upon release. Anger management counseling for the duration of your probation. $50,000 in restitution to the victim. 200 hours of community service working with children's organizations. And Mr. Thompson, yes, Your Honor, I hope you use your time in jail to reflect on the kind of man you want to be when you get out. Derek was led away in handcuffs, and Sarah watched as Rebecca broke down, crying in the gallery. The children were too young to fully understand what was happening, but they sensed their mother's distress and began crying too. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Sarah, shouting questions about how she felt about the sentence and whether justice had been served. Sarah pushed through the crowd without comment, having learned that anything she said would be dissected and analyzed by strangers on the internet. David Chin caught up with her at her car. That's it, he said. It's over. Is it though? Sarah asked. Emma's picture is all over the internet. This story will follow her for years. Kids are resilient, David said gently. And you've handled this whole situation with remarkable grace. Emma will be fine. Sarah wasn't entirely convinced, but she was ready to move forward. The legal case was over, but the real work of helping Emma heal and protecting her from the ongoing media attention was just beginning. 6 months later, Derek Thompson was released from county jail to serve the remainder of his sentence on probation. He had lost his job, his professional reputation, and a significant portion of his family's savings to legal fees and restitution payments. His marriage had survived, but barely, and his relationship with his children would require years to fully repair. The anger management classes had forced Derek to confront some uncomfortable truths about himself. He learned that his need to control situations and his inability to tolerate frustration had been building for years before exploding that day in the grocery store. The work was difficult and humbling, but it was necessary. His community service assignment was at a local children's center, helping with after-school programs and weekend activities. Initially, the other volunteers were suspicious of him, knowing why he was there. But over time, as they watched him interact patiently with children who were often more disruptive than Emma had ever been, they began to see genuine change. One afternoon, while helping a 7-year-old boy with his homework, Derek found himself thinking about Emma Martinez. The boy was frustrated with a math problem and had started to cry, and Derek's first instinct was to comfort and encourage him rather than demand silence. It's okay to be frustrated, Derek told the boy gently. Learning new things is hard sometimes, but getting upset won't make it easier. It was a lesson Derek wished he had learned before that day at the grocery store. Meanwhile, Emma was thriving in 2nd grade, her natural enthusiasm and curiosity undimmed by what had happened to her. Sarah had been careful not to make Emma afraid of the world, while still teaching her about appropriate boundaries with strangers. The media attention had finally died down, though occasionally Sarah still received messages from other military parents thanking her for standing up for children's rights. She appreciated the sentiment, but she had never wanted to become a symbol of anything. She was just a mother protecting her child. One evening, as Sarah was helping Emma with her homework, Emma looked up and asked, "Mommy, do you think the mean man learned to be nice?" Sarah considered the question carefully. She had heard through the victim's advocate that Derek was completing his community service and anger management requirements without incident. I hope so, sweetheart, Sarah said honestly. People can change if they really want to and work hard at it. I hope so too, Emma said, returning to her math worksheet. Everyone deserves a chance to be better. The simple wisdom of her 6-year-old daughter, now 7, reminded Sarah why she had served in the military in the first place. She had fought to protect the freedom and safety of people like Emma, innocent, hopeful, and capable of forgiveness even when adults failed them. The incident at the grocery store had changed all their lives in ways both big and small. For Derek, it had been a devastating wake-up call that forced him to examine his worst impulses and work to change them. For Emma, it had been a confusing and frightening experience that she had weathered with remarkable resilience. And for Sarah, it had been a reminder that the mission to protect children doesn't end when you take off the uniform. Years would pass before they would fully understand the long-term impact of those few minutes in the cereal aisle. But as Emma grew older, she would remember not just the man who pushed her, but the mother who stood up for her and the system that held him accountable. And that lesson about justice, protection, and the importance of speaking up for what's right would shape her into the kind of person who would stand up for others in their moments of need. The grocery store eventually replaced their security cameras with higher resolution models and implemented new training for staff on handling customer disputes. The cereal aisle where it all happened was remodeled, but the impact of what occurred there would be felt in the community for years to come. In the end, the story that began with a moment of unchecked anger became a testament to the power of restraint, the importance of accountability, and the possibility of redemption. Not every story has a clear hero or villain, but sometimes the most important lessons come from watching ordinary people respond to extraordinary tests of character.